How many of you have studied and have had lives enriched and blessed by the teachings of the late Thich Nhat Hanh? Raise your hand. It's a lot of you, and I imagine many on in our virtual community as well. It was a national bestseller, Living Buddha, Living Christ. Living Buddha, Living Christ. This Sunday and for each Sunday this month, I'm going to be sharing a couple of themes that each of them taught and practiced themselves as a reminder to us of what we can practice. I've entitled the series, The Path of Peace, The Path of Peace, and the two practices I want us to take a look at today that both the Buddha and the Christ taught were the practices of forgiveness and nonviolence. Forgiveness and nonviolence. I'm struck by the idea of the use of the word living, because to me, our spiritual practice is a living practice. It's not ascribing to a set of beliefs and saying, yes, I agree, I believe, and leaving that on the shelf. It is to actually do the best that we can to embody certain ways of being in the way that we live our lives, the way that we show up in our places of work, in our communities, in our spiritual centers, in our neighborhoods. It's who we are and how we choose to be. And so I'm taken just by the reminder, the powerful reminder that this is meant to be a living, breathing practice. Both the Buddha and the Christ emphasize the ideas of forgiveness and nonviolence. You may notice that I've used the word the in front of the word Buddha and in front of the word Christ. I can remember as a young person growing up here in San Diego, attending St. Andrew's Lutheran Church in San Carlos with my parents when I was in about junior high and high school. Back then they called it junior high, not middle school, and was even confirmed there. And I just had this assumption that Christ was Jesus' last name. Why wouldn't it be? My last name was Craig, Wendy Craig, before I married. So Jesus Christ made sense to me. Any of you experience that as a younger person, right? It really wasn't until I was introduced to unity and really began studying more deeply that I learned that Christ wasn't Jesus' last name, that it is a title, and it means the anointed one. And that when we use the term Christ, even following the name Jesus, we should really be saying Jesus the Christ. Jesus the Christ. And the same is true to the Buddha, Gautama, the Buddha, again referring to a nature, a way of being. That in itself, to me, the distinction there, that these are not names, that these are titles of a way of being to ascribe to, is powerful. It takes it away from what I think is rather simple to say I believe in certain things rather than I'm building my life on certain practices and principles. It's one thing to say I believe in the importance of forgiveness. It's one thing to say I believe in and I recognize the value of nonviolence, but that's not the same thing, right? As the nitty-gritty practicing of those things, practicing showing up in our lives, as Martin Luther King Jr. suggested, that forgiveness is an attitude. It's not just something we do, it's an attitude, it's a way that we approach life. So simply agreeing that these are good things is not the same thing as doing the deep and hard inner work of practicing them when we're called upon to do so. And when we're called upon to practice forgiveness, it's because there has been a perceived or very real wrong done, right? Whether it is we have done the wrong or the wrong has been done to us. Wrong never feels good, does it? And so the practice of forgiveness is actually stepping into a different way of relating to that perceived or real wrong that was either done to us or that we did to another. Same is true of this idea of nonviolence, that the idea of practicing nonviolence is practicing it in the face of those times and circumstances where our lower natures would have us reacting in a physical or violent way. Does that make sense? And instead of doing that, making a different choice to try to find a way to be present in this situation in a non-violent way. Forgiveness is considered a virtue in Buddhism. Likewise, in the teachings of Jesus, the Buddha taught the importance of letting go of anger, resentment, and hatred. Think about the last time in your life that you felt those feelings of anger, resentment, and hatred. Can you think to a time? Anger, resentment, hatred. Something must have happened, right, that you felt was wrong, and it might very well have been terribly wrong. Anger, resentment, hatred, how did it feel inside of you, though? Was it a positive feeling or an uplifting feeling? No. Anger, hatred, resentment doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good, and especially when we allow it to continue, when we allow it to simmer and seize and be something that we actually don't ever let go of. Jesus preached and taught the importance of forgiveness as well, of forgiveness and nonviolence. It is said that at the moment of the crucifixion, or on the way to the crucifixion, the words that he spoke were looking out at those who were perpetrating the crucifixion. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I don't know how much more powerful a statement one could utter in the face of something as horrific as he was about to experience. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. For they know not what they do. I cannot tell you how often when I have needed to forgive someone for something that felt really horrible, that one of the most powerful and effective ways for me to neutralize the hurt or the anger or the bitterness was to really try to hold that very essence of what Jesus said. Forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. To also move into that mindset and the heart that might say, perhaps if I were operating with exactly the same knowledge and experience and perspective that they have, perhaps I too would be acting in a similar way. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Jesus told us that we should forgive as we have been forgiven, that there's a reciprocity there, that we forgive as we have been forgiven. He emphasized also the importance of letting go of anger and resentment and holding on to those awful emotions and feelings that really cause us to pay again and again for whatever harm was done. Wasn't it Nelson Mandela who said something like, not forgiving is like drinking poison and expecting it to affect the other person? Right? And to me, that's what those feelings of resentment and anger and bitterness, when we allow them to stay within us, it is a poison to the system. There is a body of evidence that even says that it physically does do damage to our body, physically. It certainly does do damage to our quality of life, to our spirit, to our joy. In his life, in Jesus' life, we have the story of the prodigal son, right? Father had two sons. One did everything that the father wanted, played by the rules. The other asked the father for the inheritance, took the inheritance, went off, had a wild, great time, squandered it all, came back, and the father forgave him. The father threw a big party for him. The other son had a problem with that. Maybe some of us can relate to that, right? Well, what do you mean? I did all the things you told me I was supposed to do. That's because you're supposed to do them. That's because that's the better way to be. But in the story of the prodigal son, the act of forgiving is the recognition of the one that is seen that they have made a mistake and is humble enough and authentic enough to admit it and to try to come back and to find a better way. We have Jesus talking about turning the other cheek. When someone strikes you on one cheek, turn and offer the other cheek as well. What happens? You've heard me say this again and again because it's such a clear and important teaching. When we turn the other cheek, physically what happens? I see something different than when I'm keeping my vision in one direction. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Is that not a way of turning the other cheek, right? It's not really saying, hit me again. It's not that. It isn't that. It is choosing. Well, first of all, knowing that you have the power to choose. That's like fundamental, right? You have to know that you have the power to choose, even if you don't exercise it. We still have the power to make a choice between stimulus and response. There is a moment in which we always have the power to choose, even if we don't exercise it, even if we don't exercise it. So it is the choice to find a different way to look at it, to find a different way to look at it. The Buddha taught that the practices were essential for spiritual growth and liberation from suffering. The words liberation and suffering are very common in Buddha's teaching and practice. Liberation, what is liberation? It's freedom. It's freedom. What is suffering? I don't need to tell you what it is. We all know. We've all been on the experiencing end of it, right? To know that the practice of forgiveness, the practice of nonviolence are key to the liberation of suffering ought to be all the motivation that we need. Oh, the way that I free myself from these feelings of just not feeling happy or healthy or feeling like I'm stuck, which when we hold on to anger and bitterness and revenge, we're stuck, right? Am I just talking to me this morning? Maybe I'm just talking to me this morning. We're stuck. We're stuck. We're the one that's held in bondage. It's why I think the Buddha talks about this idea of the liberation of suffering to break at least some of the chain of that. In the Dhammapada, which is a collection of sayings attributed to the Buddha, forgiveness is extolled as a virtue that leads to happiness and peace. To happiness and peace. I know that when I was first introduced, and it was probably in the church, to the idea of forgiving, it was something that you were supposed to do because you're a good person. You're just supposed to forgive, right? And I think my understanding of forgiveness early on was more that it was about the other person. I'm forgiving them, with the focus being on them. It wasn't until I really got into what I consider to be deeper spiritual teaching and practice that I realized, yes, they may or may not be affected by my forgiving them. They may not even know it. They may not believe it. I may not choose to say anything. But the real recipient of the benefit isn't them. It's me. It's me. It's me freeing me from the suffering of holding on to that unforgiveness. The Buddha also taught that we were to conquer anger with kindness. Think about that for a moment. Think about the last time you were angry. And let's make it like a simple thing, like somebody cut you off on the freeway. Probably something we can, you get angry. Maybe you get angry. You get angry. Imagine trying to flip that right away, getting so good that you could flip that right away to sending kindness. Do any of you have a little bit of a gap between the anger piece and the flipping to kindness piece? I know I still do. At least the kindness thought does pop in pretty darn quickly. But that first thing may be anger or just fear. Sometimes it's just fear. but to make that different choice, Both the Buddha and the Christ taught the importance of forgiveness as a means of healing and reconciliation, as a means of our own healing and healing perhaps with another, whether it's practicing forgiveness of ourselves for something we know that we did that caused harm or hurt or loss to another, that it winds up being very much a path to peace. I don't know how we can expect to move through the journey of peace and move into the experience of peace without taking as our companions the practice of forgiveness and the practice of nonviolence. They both emphasize the transformative power of forgiveness to release oneself from the burden of resentment and to restore relationships. Not every relationship can be completely repaired when there has been tremendous hurt and damage done. But that still does not negate the truth with a capital T, that we can be in relationship with that person or that situation from our side of things in a healthier, more peaceful way. And that healthier, more peaceful way will absolutely have a positive effect on us, on all aspects of our life. And there are also any number of times that moving into the experience of forgiveness, moving into holding nonviolent thoughts about the other, loving thoughts about the other, can actually heal and transform the relationship, can actually begin to bring the relationship back together again. We lose so much, I believe, we lose so much in our relationship if we do not make the effort to mend fences and to forgive, to find a path to do that. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? I want to share a piece that I pulled up this morning. I was remembering more of Mahatma Gandhi's life, and he was truly a proponent of forgiveness and truly a proponent of ahimsa, which is a word for living in a nonviolent way. And this is a statement he made only days before he was murdered. He said, "I believe in the message of truth delivered by all the religions of the world, and it is my constant prayer that I may never have a feeling of anger against my traducers," somebody who speaks evil of you or libelous of you, "that even if I fail a victim," let me start over because it's too good. "I believe in the message of truth delivered by all the religious teachers of the world, and it is my constant prayer that I may never have a feeling of anger against my traducers, that even if I fall a victim to an assassin's bullet, I may deliver up my soul with the remembrance of a God upon my lips. I shall be content to be written down an impostor if my lips utter a word of anger or abuse against my assailant at that last moment." Would you say that's a high bar? Are you there? I'm not there. But I'm glad to know that there was a living being who set that bar and I think hit that bar, because it says to me that there's hope for me. It's not going to be done for me, but I can get better and better at being more forgiving. I can get better and better at being more nonviolent. When I think of nonviolence, I think the obvious literal, not being violent toward another, and that's a whole other conversation we could get into that I'm not going to go into right now. But I also think of nonviolence mentally. I remember reading or hearing this thought, and it stayed with me. The thought being, how safe is it for someone to walk through the corridors of your mind? Let me say that again. How safe is it for someone to walk through the corridors of your mind? It's probably very safe for Mahatma Gandhi to walk through the corridors of your mind. It's probably very safe for Mother Teresa to walk through the corridors of your mind. There may be people that you think of today in your life personally or on the national stage or the world stage that it is not so easy for them to walk through the corridors of your mind in a nonviolent and peaceful way, meaning that you can think about them without any violent thought about them. It's what Gandhi was saying. He said, it's my prayer that I may never have a feeling against. So let me share with you just a few practical, to me, they're practical how-tos on this. So how do you get better at practicing forgiveness? How do you get better at practicing being more safe in your mind, more nonviolent? I think the first is to notice the anger and work to let it go. Notice when you're feeling angry. Notice when you're feeling resentment. Don't push it away. Don't ignore it. Just notice that you're feeling it, and then choose a simple practice like breathing, bringing a mindful breath into the experience. You're feeling angry. Take a moment to take a deep breath in, hold that breath, let that breath go, and practice a simple act of breathing mindfully and consciously. It can help a lot to begin to dial back and down the feeling of anger. Notice feelings of resentment and do the best you can when you notice a feeling of resentment to find a place for compassion. When I feel resentful of a person or a situation, if it's a person, I try to think of them in a different way. And sometimes I have to go way back and imagine how they might have been as a precious little baby. That one always works for me. I don't always have to use that, but that one always works for me. I can't have any hatred or malice or bad feelings about a precious little baby. We all start that way. And then life happens and we make mistakes, and maybe we didn't hear songs and messages like, I forgive you and you're okay and I'm there for you and I love you and I support you and we'll figure this out. And so if you don't hear messages that are uplifting and supportive and affirming, you can feel very wounded. And I think it's wounded people, by and large. It's out of our woundedness that we can cause great harm to each other. Notice thoughts of revenge and choose to neutralize them with the power of blessing. Notice if you have a thought of revenge. Be honest with yourself. Right now I feel like getting even. That's a human feeling, right? You know, there may be things that have been done to you where you feel like you'd like to get even. You want to even up the score. If you believe in karma, karma will even up the score. I believe in karma. I don't think I have to do that job. I don't think I have to do that job. I was working through, this is years ago, a very difficult situation, personal situation, in which something horrible had been done to somebody that I cared very, very much about. And I remember sharing it with a confidant and a friend who actually happened to be a San Diego court judge. And when I shared with her some of what had happened, she looked at me and she said, but Wendy, don't you think in the end it's better to be the one to whom it was done than to be the kind of person to do it? That took my breath away. It gives me chills even as I say that. And she just, a judge. Better to be the one to whom it was done than to be the kind of person to do it. That didn't negate the harm that was done. It didn't minimize what was done. But it, like Jesus, turned the other cheek. It was a very different way of looking at it. And that's one of the very simple three pieces I want to share with you right now in the few minutes I have left. Number one, make it a practice to turn the other cheek. Make it a practice to turn the other cheek. View it, whatever it was that happened or whatever it was that you did. Try viewing it from a different angle. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. A lot of times when something's done to us, a lot of times it wasn't even done intentionally. Doesn't take away the hurt we feel, right? But it isn't always done intentionally. Find a way to turn the other cheek. Repetition and completion. When Jesus was asked about forgiveness, well, how long, how much do I have to forgive? Right? He said, 2 times. No, he didn't. He said 70 times 7. And it didn't mean on the 491st time, you got a get out of jail card free. No. 70 times 7, there's a whole thing about numbers in the Bible. And I'm not going to go into that now. But 70 times 7 was a way of saying you do it until it is complete. You practice forgiving until it is complete. How do you know when it's complete? When you have a neutralized feeling. When you can think about what happened and you can be neutral about what happened. That's when you know that it is complete. The last 2 things I'll share. Sometimes it's enough to get started to say, I want to forgive. Take that in for a moment. Because sometimes, if we've been on the receiving end of physical abuse, sexual abuse, been betrayed and lost everything, cheated, all the big stuff, the anger and the hurt and the bitterness that we're holding still is harmful to us, even if it seems completely understandable and justified. We need to eventually free ourselves from it so we're not paying for whatever that was again and again and again and again. A first step sometimes is simply to be in prayer about, God, Spirit, help me want to forgive. Does that make sense? And then the last is a practice of the meditation technique. It's a beautiful Buddhist meditation practice and technique. There are somewhat different versions of it. The prayer that we end with at the end of our service, may all beings be happy, may all beings be healthy, may all beings be free of pain and suffering, may all beings know the comfort and ease of well-being, may all beings be at peace. The actual practice of it is you start with holding that for yourself. May I be happy, may I be healthy, and so forth. Then you hold it for a teacher or a beloved, someone that it's so easy for you to admire or respect, and you hold that metta blessing for that person. Then you hold that metta blessing for a family member. Then you hold that metta blessing for an extended circle, the person that you kind of know at Starbucks maybe, or the one that always helps you at a particular store or so forth, someone you're not necessarily very close friends with, but you recognize them, you hold it for them. Then you hold it for somebody that is sandpaper to your soul. And then you try to hold it for the world. It's like in these beautiful concentric circles. The practice of it really does work, but it only works if we really practice it and let it be, to use the words in the book, the title of the book, living, that we live this. We won't live it perfectly. We don't have to live it perfectly. But if we live it as consistently as we possibly can, we absolutely will reap the benefits, no matter what the other person may ever do. Namaste.